Hey listeners, thanks for dropping in. I'm Christy.
And I'm Melissa. And this is Buried Motives, where we dig deep into the details of some of the most gruesome
dirtbag murderers. Hey listeners!
Welcome back to Buried Motives.
We're back, baby!
We are feeling refreshed and rejuvenated for this new year.
Thank you for sticking with us and letting us take that little break. We're so happy to be back, and we have a lot of fun things in the works.
Absolutely. And Christy is ready for today's episode.
I am, because if you guys recall, near the end of the year, our last couple of episodes, that Melissa told, I got a little riled in each of them.
Just a little.
Just a little bit. So I got a present from my husband that says, it's a throat punch kind of day. Because I didn't realize I often will say that I want to punch the dirtbag in the throat. But I guess I do, looking back. And so I'm wearing my shirt and I'm ready to be riled and say that I want to punch that dirtbag in the throat.
And if any of you ever feel that same sentiment, you can join Christy now, because that saying is now featured on our merch. Go to our website and check it out.
Yep. If you ever feel like it's a throat punch kind of day and you just need to warn everybody. But as per usual, I do not know what Melissa's about to tell me, so I don't know if I'm going to feel like punching someone in the throat or not.
But at least she's prepared for today.
I am. I'm ready. I'm just going to accept this part of me and embrace it.
As long as you don't become a dirtbag, Christy.
That's true. Just so everybody knows, I have never actually punched somebody in the throat. In my mind a few times, but not physically.
I have heard that is quite painful.
Yes. We do not condone violence. Just have to put it out there so we don't get blamed for someone actually punching someone in the throat. Well, Christy and Melissa said it was okay.
No, Christy and Melissa did not say it was okay.
No, but it is okay to feel that way sometimes.
Yes. Let's get into today's episode so we can see how you're going to feel about it today. On January 6, 1982, in Breckenridge, Colorado, 29-year-old Barbara Oberholtzer didn't return home after work.
Oh, no.
Barbara went by Bobbie Jo. She and her husband Jeff had married on July 1st, 1977, after dating for a few years. Bobbie Jo had an 11-year-old daughter, and the family was originally from Racine, Wisconsin. And the family wanted to experience the adventure of living in the mountains of Colorado. They had bought a home in Alma, about 30 minutes south of Breckenridge. Her husband Jeff reported her missing almost immediately in the early morning hours of January 7th to the police. Jeff told police that Bobbie Jo had left their home that morning for work at 7:15 and hitchhiked to work. She worked at the local real estate office as a receptionist in Breckenridge.
And I'm sorry, but I'm getting thrown by the name Bobbie Jo. We have a listener, Bobbie Jo, who I love. And if you're listening, I love you.
It is a great name.
It really is.
Yeah. After her workday was done, she called Jeff at 6:20 p.m. and said that she was going out with some coworkers. She had gotten an unexpected promotion and was in the mood to celebrate. She told him that she wouldn't stay out too late and that he didn't need to come pick her up because she would just hitch a ride home. Hitchhiking was a normal thing for Bobbie Jo to do. It was a common thing for the time, especially in the small ski town of only 1,200 people. It was a quaint little ski resort town at the base of the Rocky Mountains. It was just the kind of place that the couple were looking for to explore their self-proclaimed, quote, hippie lifestyle.
Oh, that would maybe explain more of being so free about hitchhiking.
Yeah. This town was surrounded by nature and wildlife and good people that were always willing to pick somebody up who needed a ride to their next destination. So it wasn't a hard thing to do to hitchhike. As Jeff waited for Bobbie Jo to come home, he said that he drifted off to sleep on the couch. When he woke up around midnight and realized that Bobbie Jo still wasn't home, he figured that she was just out, quote, kicking up her heels a little bit and had forgotten about the time. He told police that when she still wasn't home by 2 a.m., after he knew the bars would be closed, he just, quote, knew something was not right.
Oh, what a horrible feeling that would be.
Mm-hmm. He drove into Breckenridge and looked for her. At the home of one of the friends that she had been out with that night, he learned that Bobbie Jo had done just as she had told him she would. She had left the bar early that night, around 7:50 p.m. Her friends had assumed that she had caught a ride home and hadn't thought anything more about Bobbie Jo until Jeff showed up at their doorstep.
Oh, no. So now she's been gone for quite the period of time. Hours.
Several hours. Now Jeff was really worried because the night was exceptionally cold, even for Colorado in January. The temperatures had gone to almost 30 degrees below zero, which is about minus 34 degrees Celsius.
Ooh, that is cold.
Yeah. And there was this huge storm going on, so he was really concerned. He drove right to the Breckenridge Police Department. There he was told that it was much too early to file a missing persons report and that he would have to go home and wait.
Oh, that's frustrating.
Yes, we have talked about this many times. It's a little bit different now, but back in 1982, there was this wait period that a lot of police departments mandated before they would actually start looking for somebody.
Right. And thankfully that's changed in a lot of areas.
Mm-hmm. But you would think with a snowstorm going on and it being that cold and knowing that she was going to hitchhike, that you would just start looking for her, would you not?
Yes. And on top of that, she could be inebriated.
Mm-hmm.
And she could have even just fallen somewhere and be in a ditch freezing to death.
Right. Without even thinking that something nefarious has happened, you would still be concerned about her welfare.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jeff did go home and tried to wait it out. The next morning, Jeff received a call from a farmer around 7:45 in the morning. The farmer lived just outside of Breckenridge. This person had come across Bobbie Jo's driver's license and a few other items that he assumed would have been in her purse. They were all just blowing around on his driveway, close to the side of the highway.
Oh, no.
Jeff arranged to go with two friends over to the farmer's house and pick up Bobbie Jo's things. On the way there, close to where he approached the ranch, he spotted something blue in the field as they drove past. The blue stuck out against the white of the snow, and it looked very familiar. It was Bobbie Jo's backpack, one that he knew she had taken with her the previous morning when she had left for work. Close by, he found one of her gloves and some tissues. The gloves and the tissues all had blood on them.
Oh, my goodness.
Can you imagine the scenarios that would run through your mind?
No. Well, I can, and it's horrific. Your mind would be racing, and you would be jumping to the worst case scenario. I would be, at least.
You would, but I'm not sure my mind, well, after doing the podcast, I think that's where my mind would go, would be to murder. But somebody that doesn't have that kind of frame of reference, I would be thinking that they hurt themselves.
Yeah, I would be hoping that that's all it was.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, you would be super anxious about it and worried.
Right. And Jeff was. With the help of his friends, they organized a search party through the remote area between Breckenridge and Alma, along the route that Bobbie Jo usually took as she was traveling back and forth to work. Jeff says his friends insisted that he stay home while they conducted the search. After 2 hours of looking in the freezing temperatures, they discovered what had happened to Bobbie Jo about 20 miles or 32 kilometers from where her purse and backpack had been found. Bobbie Jo was found fully clothed in the snowbank next to the Colorado Highway No. 9, 5 to 10 miles outside of Breckenridge. The snowbank was near Hauser Pass, a summit of over 11,000 feet in elevation.
Ooh.
Yeah, she was found 400 feet from the top, lying on her back. Police were called to the scene, and it was clear that the once full-of-life Bobbie Jo had been shot twice. Autopsy would reveal that she had been shot with an either .38 or a .357 handgun, using a Remington or a Peters copper-jacketed hollow point bullet. The crime scene was a bit perplexing. There was only one set of footprints found, those of Bobbie Jo's.
Oh, so she hadn't been shot there and was able to walk to where she fell?
She had been shot there.
Oh. I know nothing about guns. Big surprise. The weapons that they're suspecting she was shot with, can they be fired from a far range where there wouldn't have been another set of footprints?
Not a super far range. I think the .357 is that great big huge handgun that you get the kickback from. So they're handguns, they're not sniper rifles.
Okay.
Near her body, police found an unusually hooked keyring in the parking lot of the Summit Trail and a single orange sock. Bobbie Jo's body was frozen from laying out in the snow exposed to the elements. Her hands were close together, with two 18-inch zip ties around only her left wrist.
Oh, no.
Police suspected that Bobbie Jo must have been fleeing her kidnapper and trying to run away through the snow when she was shot.
That's terrifying, Melissa.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever tried to run through deep snow?
Yeah, I just did the other day with my dog. He was way faster than me.
It's so hard.
It is really hard.
And so I can't imagine her fear of trying to make it through all of this deep snow and up over a snowbank on the side of the road as the snow is trying to suck you in.
Yeah, you feel like you're running in slow motion.
Mm-hmm. It would have been terrifying.
It would have.
As police investigated the crime scene, Jeff insisted on being shown his wife's body. He identified the keyring that was found as belonging to his wife. It was one that he had made for her to protect herself. It was a heavy brass hook fashioned as a keychain. It could pack a punch if she needed it to. And so that's why he had created it for her.
So she obviously had it out trying to defend herself.
Mm-hmm. Jeff couldn't identify the orange sock, though. It didn't belong to Bobbie Jo. Police chalked it up to being kind of one of those random pieces of garbage that's often found at a crime scene. Something that they tagged and cataloged just in case, but they really weren't thinking that it had anything to do with Bobbie Jo's murder. Police were not overly impressed with Jeff's behavior at the crime scene. They felt his insistence to see his wife's body in the body bag was suspicious, and they told him so. And their suspicions of him would only grow over time.
Oh, I hope he's not the murderer. Dang it, Grandpa!
Hang on. In a seemingly random coincidence, that day after Bobbie Jo was found, another woman was reported missing. 21-year-old Annette Schnee was described as a laid-back, free-spirited type girl. She had gone to school in Omaha, and when she was younger, she had wanted to be a flight attendant, just to see the world. She was an adventurer, it sounded like.
Aww.
She had decided to move to Colorado on her own the previous year from her hometown in Sioux City, Iowa. And I'm sure the landscape in Colorado had a very different kind of feel for her.
Definitely.
She had settled in Blue River, about a 10-minute drive south of Breckenridge. She was working 2 jobs at the time to support herself. During the day, she worked as a chambermaid, and in the evening, she worked as a cocktail waitress. Her morning job was in Frisco, another 10 miles north of Breckenridge. And all of these places are along Highway number 9 in Colorado. So she would pass through Breckenridge on her commute to work.
Hey.
Annette's coworker had reported her missing, saying that she hadn't shown up for work at her waitressing job at the Phillips side the evening of the 6th.
So that's the same day as Bobbie Jo disappearing.
Right. But it had taken a couple of days for them to report her missing because she lived alone.
Gotcha.
As police investigated Annette's whereabouts, they learned that she had taken off early that day from work at her job at the Holiday Inn because she wasn't feeling well. She went to the doctor's in the afternoon and then was seen at a pharmacy in Breckenridge around 4:30 p.m. At the time, a witness said that when she left, Annette had been seen talking with some unknown dark-haired woman. Annette was supposed to have started her shift at 8 p.m. the night of January 6th, but she never showed up. Her family rushed to Colorado to help search for her. Police learned that Annette, just like Bobbie Jo, was no stranger to hitchhiking. It was how she got around. It was actually how a lot of people got around in this town, which I find hard to wrap my head around. Not only because now we know different and the dangers that can come from hitchhiking, but I just can't understand the efficiency around it. How do you plan to hitchhike to work and know what time you have to leave?
That's true, because there's no guarantee that someone's going to come by and offer you a ride.
Right. And so for me, I was like, I don't think I could do that.
That's true. How do you get to work on time every time?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, or are you always 6 hours early for work? Because it would have taken you 6 hours to walk that distance, but you were planning on somebody picking you up?
Yeah, not likely.
The logistics of it just boggle my mind.
Yeah, especially when you could just carpool. And then you have, okay, for this week, this is who's driving, and I'll drive next week, and then Tom can drive the following week.
Yes. But for both of these women, and apparently for lots of people in this town at the time, hitchhiking was just a really common thing. It was a small town. Everybody knew everybody else, and so they would just offer rides as they passed them.
Well, it's definitely a different time, because we live in a small town, and that is not the vibe.
No.
Even though it's a friendly town.
Yeah. Even though hitchhiking was a common practice at the time, the fact that both women had been hitchhiking seemed relevant to police. It seemed like a connection between these 2 random strangers and their cases. They went back to Jeff and asked him if he knew Annette Schnee. He denied it. Several days later, he changed his mind. Jeff reached out to police.
I wish Jeff was a good guy. This isn't looking good.
Well, Jeff reached out to the police. He told them that he had since seen Annette's photo in the paper and that he did recognize her. He said that he had once picked her up and given her a ride when she was hitchhiking. He recalled that it had been sometime in November, over 2 months before. He said that he had even given her his business card. He was a local repairman and had recently just had business cards printed up to drum up some business, so he was handing them out like candy. This again seemed like a connection to the police. But Jeff was upfront about his connection to the missing women. Even if it didn't make a lot of sense and seemed like a random coincidence, he wanted to be upfront with the police. But this being upfront with the police didn't win him any brownie points, especially when he came to them again and said that he had had a premonition that Annette would be found dead.
What?
Yes. Jeff told police that he believed that Annette would be found 4 miles from his house on the 4th of July.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Super odd, right?
Yeah, that is very odd. I'm not sure how I feel about that yet.
Right.
Especially because he didn't have a connection to this woman. We have talked about cases where someone very close to the victim has had a premonition or they've come to them in a dream, but this just seems very random.
It does. And it almost seems like a guilty person trying to be like, oh, you're going to find their body here.
Yeah, I just have a feeling that she might be over there.
Right.
It's going to look suspicious.
Jeff, though, would deny the claims that he was appearing guilty by saying that he had always been a person to have premonitions. He had had them his whole life. When Annette's body was found 6 months later, on July 3rd, only 6 miles from Jeff's house near Fairplay, Colorado, nobody really knew what to think of this premonition.
Yeah, that's pretty close.
It's fairly accurate. Annette's body was discovered by a little boy who had headed down a local road to do some fishing at a spot only locals were familiar with.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That is sad.
It is super sad. Just traumatizing.
For that little boy.
Mm-hmm. Annette was found fully clothed, lying face down in the Sacramento Creek. She had been shot once in the back. The bullet had traveled at a downward angle of about 30 degrees and exited through the front of her body. This indicated to police that she had either been kneeling when she was shot or she had been running away downhill. While she was found dressed, her clothing was found in, quote, disarray. The zipper of her jeans had been broken and her shoes were on the wrong feet. Police would speculate that she had been raped, but there wasn't any evidence left at the time to actually confirm that. Because her body had been out in the elements.
Ah.
When Annette's body was examined more closely, Jeff's card was found in her jacket, and they could see on her left foot was an orange booty-like sock. A match for the one that had been found close to Bobbie Jo's body.
Oh, that is eerie.
Mm-hmm. This was clearly a thread that connected both women and Jeff. Jeff was asked to provide an alibi for the afternoon and the evening of January 6th, but he wasn't able to provide one that the police were able to verify. He told them that a friend had dropped by and that they had hung out at his home the whole evening. But when police went to look for this friend, they weren't able to find him.
Oh.
This case goes cold for a very long time. And it wouldn't be until about 9 years later when police were eventually able to track down this friend. But the friend's recall of the time didn't line up with exactly what Jeff had told the police.
But it's also 9 years later.
Right. Despite all fingers pointing in his direction, Jeff continuously denied any involvement with the murders. Trying to convince the police and the press, Jeff said, quote, "I can only say that I didn't do anything. As a matter of fact, we had just planned several days before that it was time for us to have children. I miss my wife. I did not kill her." Jeff continued to insist that he knew Bobbie Jo would never get into a vehicle with a complete stranger, that they had talked about the dangers of doing this, and Bobbie Jo could have just as easily called him and he would have come and picked her up.
But I thought that was the whole point of hitchhiking, that she was just going to get a random ride.
Right. He was telling police that she wouldn't just go with a stranger. She would have asked somebody that she had at least knew from around town.
Okay.
That's what he felt.
Okay.
So he was pretty insistent with police that this wasn't a stranger that hurt Bobbie Jo.
It had to be somebody that she knew in some way.
Right. And he felt that way because they had had conversations about that scenario. And he had already offered her a ride home. He was perfectly open to coming and getting her. She knew that she could call Jeff to come pick her up.
She had options.
Right. So he really didn't believe that she would go with a stranger. Jeff believed that whoever had given Bobbie Jo a ride that night was someone that she would have known from around town. For all the police tried, they couldn't find anything substantial to link Jeff to the murders. Jeff agreed to 2 different polygraph tests to move the investigation forward and passed them both. And it sounded like there was absolutely no love lost between Jeff and the investigative team.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. Even decades after the murder, police still thought of Jeff as their number 1 suspect, even though they couldn't pin him for it. It really wasn't until DNA advanced enough to rule him out as a suspect did they actually start to concede, reluctantly, that Jeff wasn't their guy.
Oh, I'm so glad that Jeff isn't their guy. I really didn't want him to be in this case. So now that they have this DNA technology, do they find DNA in the orange socks? I really want to know who those belong to.
They do.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll get there.
Good.
But Jeff was pretty angry about all of this because he believed that if the police could have just taken their attention from him for more than 5 minutes, then maybe they would have been able to actually find the real killer.
Which is a valid point, because if this person killed 2 women on the same day, how many possible women could he have killed in 9 years afterwards?
Well, it's way more than 9 years. The investigation remained really active for about 18 months, but then it started to peter off after no new leads could be found. This investigation goes on for more than 40 years.
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm. There were a few detectives, to their credit, that just could not let this case go completely cold. Detective Richard Eaton from the Summit County Sheriff's Office wouldn't give up, and neither would Charlie McCormack. He was a retired homicide detective from Denver that had settled in Breckenridge to enjoy the quiet life and try to recover from all the horror that he had seen while on duty investigating murder in the city. When he moved to Breckenridge, he became aware of the cold case and started digging into it. Moonlighting as a PI, Charlie was, quote, hired by Annette's family in 1989 for the agreed-upon price of $1 per year.
Oh, so he was doing this out of the goodness of his heart.
Yeah. For the next 32 years, he said there wasn't a single day that went by that he did not work on the case in some way or another, creating over 46 case books on the investigation.
That is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's volunteering his time to do this.
Yep.
What a gem.
But it sounded like he had said that the family had hired him so that he actually had the rights to go and look into all the cases.
Right. So the $1 a year was just a formality, so it was official.
That's right. But he had heard about this case in his new hometown, and he just could not put it down. He pushed for the case to be featured on Unsolved Mysteries and the Discovery Channel, all trying to catch the dirtbag that had gotten away. Police over time developed a theory that whoever had killed Bobbie Jo and Annette had picked up Annette sometime around 5 p.m., as she had set out to hitchhike home after being at the drugstore. Items from her backpack were found in Breckenridge. They then surmised that the killer drove 20 miles or 32 kilometers south of Breckenridge, past Alma, where Bobbie Jo and Jeff lived, and turned down a small dead-end road in a remote area that had led to the creek where she would later be found. It was the kind of back road only locals would know about. Police believe that Annette was forced to undress and possibly sexually assaulted. Afterwards, they believed her kidnapper made her dress quickly in his vehicle. While dressing quickly, police believe that a panicked and distressed Annette couldn't find one of her orange booty socks and quickly moved on to shove her feet into the wrong shoes. There was no way to know for sure, because of the time that had passed, if Annette had then tried to flee or if the dirtbag had led her to the creek and had her kneel there at gunpoint before he shot her.
Terrible.
But that was the sequence of events that the police believed had occurred to leave the orange sock behind when the dirtbag's next victim, Bobbie Jo, would try and fight her way free and flee the dirtbag's vehicle. It was believed that the dirtbag went back into Breckenridge to possibly have a drink, and that's where he picked up Bobbie Jo. He drove her out to a scenic outlook about 10 miles south of Breckenridge, close to her home. When he tried to rape her, Bobbie Jo had fought back. Police believe that during the struggle, And later, when Bobbie Jo escaped from the vehicle, that Bobbie Jo's purse and the sock were knocked out of the truck, linking the two victims.
Okay, and the sock wasn't found down in the ditch by her body. It was more up by the road.
It was more up by the road.
Well,
Yeah.
it definitely was a plausible thing that could have happened.
Mm-hmm. Police came to believe that based on the blood evidence from her gloves and the tissues found by Jeff, that Bobbie Jo had used her protective keyring made by her loving husband to fight for her life and had injured her attacker in the process. The blood that was found on her gloves and tissues was not hers. It belonged to a man.
Ooh, that's awesome.
It is. And originally, when they're doing the crime scene investigation, they didn't have the technology to actually test the DNA, but they knew it wasn't hers and they knew it belonged to a man.
And this is the evidence that they used to rule out Jeff.
That's right. Because it wasn't his blood type.
Okay.
Before she was shot twice herself while fleeing over the snowbank and into some trees, Bobbie Jo had managed to fight back enough to produce evidence that would catch her killer, even if it took 40 years to do it.
Wow.
Yeah. In 1998, while going over the evidence again, detectives discovered that there was enough blood evidence on the gloves to do DNA testing. This was the DNA testing that would be used to clear Jeff even further. At that time, it was put through the FBI's combined DNA index system, but unfortunately, there were no matches. In 2019, those still working on the case heard about the United Data Connect, a forensic science company specializing in DNA. In early 2020, they were convinced that they should take a chance on giving a sample of the DNA evidence available to the Denver-based company to run a profile through the publicly available genealogical databases. This was the same way that the Golden State Killer was captured just a few years before.
Mm-hmm. It is fascinating technology.
Mm-hmm.
And even good on that police station for preserving that DNA, collecting it, and preserving it for future use. It's amazing that it lasts 40 years and they can still test it.
It's so incredible, especially when you consider that when it was being collected, they had no idea that it would ever be able to be used this way.
Yes.
It's just fascinating. But I thought this was interesting that it was a conscious decision for them to test the DNA, because there's always the potential when DNA evidence is sent for testing that it can be destroyed and be unable to be tested again later, depending on the process they use to test it.
Right. So it's like putting all your eggs in one basket.
Right. So there's a potential risk there to test samples from a finite amount of evidence available.
Mm-hmm.
But the decision was made to go through with the testing. And on January 9th, 2021, almost a year later, it paid off. 2 possible matches from the genealogical database came back. The DNA had matched to 2 brothers, Bruce and Allan Phillips. Bruce was 74 years old and lived in Arizona. He had never lived in Colorado, but his younger brother, 69-year-old Allan, did. And he had lived there since the 1970s. Allan Lee Phillips was born on January 6, 1951, in Cadillac, Michigan, to Robert Lee Phillips and Willa Mae Rudder. Not a lot is known publicly about his early years or his family, but it seems that he was a little bit of the black sheep and his family was estranged from him.
He was a dirtbag.
Mm-hmm. And sounds like they knew it. Allan's father worked as an executive salesman, and the family moved around a lot when he was little, from Michigan to Wisconsin to Indiana, and then on to Texas. It seemed that most of his family would choose to remain in Texas, but Allan would go on to Oklahoma. There, he attended the Oklahoma Military Academy for his high school years. The academy seemed to have a pretty good reputation, but it was not safe from budget cuts and had to close its doors just a year after Allan left. After graduating in 1970, Allan entered Ottawa College in Kansas, but for a short time, he didn't seem to graduate from there and instead became a mechanic at the Lincoln Mine in Clear Creek County in Colorado. He had a very brief marriage to a woman named Dolly in 1973. The couple lived in Fairplay, Colorado for about 13 months before they divorced in 1974. He did remain in contact with Dolly after the couple split for a very long time. So it seemed like they couldn't make the marriage work, but they were still friends. Allan married again shortly after on February 21st, 1976, to Cheryl Jean. Together they had a daughter in 1979, but the couple divorced only 3 years later in March of 1982.
Ooh.
When Allan was 30, right after the murders of Bobbie Jo and Annette, which I thought was very interesting timing.
Yes.
So the divorce would have already had to be in the works. But it makes me wonder, was he just angry at all women at this time?
Because of a second failed marriage.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe it had something to do with just the kind of dirtbag he was. Because as police started to connect the dots, they started digging into Allan's past. It wasn't an easy task. Detectives could tell that Allan had a previous criminal record, but had trouble tracking it down completely. Record keeping was very different when everything was on paper. They knew that Allan had been arrested for assault and burglary in 1973. But just the charges on a rap sheet didn't give them much details about the actual crimes that were committed. And the details are always helpful to know the full story.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. But how often do you read assault and burglary? And they can mean very different things.
Oh, definitely.
Mm-hmm. So detectives wanted to dig a little deeper. But neither the district attorney's office nor the court had any records of the proceedings. The case records had actually been purged in 2002.
Oh, no.
Mm-hmm. Who's thinking you need to go back 40 years to catch a dirtbag?
True.
Next, the detectives, though, tried the sheriff's office archives. But there had been a fire in that building, and many of the cases had been destroyed. Of those that were left, they had to be searched meticulously by hand. After searching through hundreds of boxes and filing cabinets, in the very last filing cabinet, in the second last drawer, one persistent detective was able to locate the file with Allan's name on it.
No way. That is good police work.
Mm-hmm. Talk about not giving up, right?
No, that would have been painstaking.
Mm-hmm. And when you've reached that last filing cabinet, you're down to the very last couple of drawers. Would you not feel like, oh, what's the point?
Totally.
Mm-hmm. But this detective finished it off. She was amazing.
Persistence pays off.
Exactly. Nearly a decade prior to the murders of Annette and Bobbie Jo, Allan had been convicted of assault and burglary at the age of 22. Allan confessed at that time to picking up a woman who was hitchhiking outside of Breckenridge and giving her a ride to Fairplay. Along the way, he had stopped at an empty cabin and pulled the girl from his Jeep and sexually assaulted her. He then picked up a rock and used it to hit her several times.
Ugh.
Somehow, this young woman was able to convince Allan to let her go, and she later reported the incident to police. In his confession from the earlier assault, he said, quote, "I don't know why I do this."
Ooh.
Which sounds to me like he's done it before.
Absolutely.
Because you think that he would say, "I don't know why I did this."
And why I do this, meaning you're still doing it.
Mm-hmm. At the time, Allan served only 6 months in jail for the crime.
Ugh.
It's so sad because sexual predators are just so hard to reform.
Yeah, and often get such small sentences for their crimes.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me want to punch someone in the throat.
You're wearing the right shirt. Another shocking discovery happened as they investigated. Detectives learned that Allan's name had actually come up in the investigation in 2005.
No way.
Yeah. A tip was called into Crime Stoppers, naming Allan as a person to look into. Unfortunately, it hadn't been followed up on for some reason. By the time that investigators learned about this tip, too much time had passed to confirm the details from the tipster.
What?
Mm-hmm.
That is so unfortunate that got missed.
Yeah, they couldn't really figure out how it had dropped through the cracks, but it had. Investigators learned that after Bobbie Jo and Annette's deaths, Allan had seemingly gone on with his life. He married for a third time 2 years after the murders to Colleen Evans. I believe they remained married until her death in November of 2001. She was in a tragic car accident caused by her brakes failing, which I thought was pretty ironic. And maybe not so if you're the conspiracy type, since Allan provided for Colleen and their family by continuing to work as a mechanic.
Ew.
Yeah.
That's suspicious.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
did he tamper with her brakes?
I don't know. But he did work as a mechanic at the Lincoln Mine for some time before opening his own repair shop.
Oh. But is this how the plumber's wife always has the leaky taps?
Probably.
That he never got around to looking at their vehicle? Or was something sinister at play?
I don't know.
We already know he's a dirtbag and that he's capable of murdering women. But would this be just a way to make it look like an accident for him, since he's connected directly to her?
Maybe. He does come off as kind of the manipulative thinker type, to me anyway.
Huh.
Allan continued to live a full life, pursuing his hobbies and fixing up cars in Clear Creek County, at the time as a semi-retired mechanic, living in Dermont, less than 20 miles from where the bodies were found. It was too good of a life for the dirtbag that had taken lives.
It just feels so unfair when they get away with it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
He got to live the best years of his life.
Right.
And those poor women didn't.
And their families were scarred, and it didn't seem like he was scarred at all.
Ugh.
For the next 40 years, he had stayed in and around the area where he had murdered Bobbie Jo and Annette, continuing on as just one of the friendly locals, feeling pretty confident that he had gotten away with not just one murder, but two.
And do they really believe that he stopped murdering? That it was just two and he was done?
They couldn't find any connection to any other murders, but I have a hard time believing that he just stopped.
Me too.
He has a pretty clear pattern.
Especially if he doesn't have any remorse.
Yeah, it's hard to know if he actually did stop, but they didn't connect him to any more. But he's definitely not remorseful, and he does not confess. But that didn't stop the relentless detective work. Detectives were willing to wait around until they had the science to back up their investigation. When DNA results came back pointing the finger at Allan, police started trailing him, watching his activities and hoping to retrieve discarded garbage so that they could confirm the DNA match was to him specifically. And I think they must not have had enough evidence against him at the time to secure a warrant for his DNA. So they had to trail him and get his DNA by some other legal means. This would take 5 weeks to obtain a piece of discarded trash. Investigators would later make comments about how careful Allan was never to throw anything away in a public trash bin.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he totally was still killing then. Because 40-some years later, you're not going to be worried about those initial murders.
Well, it did make me very curious. I wondered if maybe he had been tipped off by his estranged brother. It didn't sound like they talked very much, but maybe his brother did tell him that the police had initially contacted him about the match and he had pointed them in Allan's direction. So maybe his brother said, hey, the police might be looking for you. And then he got kind of nervous when they didn't contact him. I don't know if that was the case. Or maybe he was spooked by the fact that Joseph James D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, had just been caught that way.
Oh, maybe. It was probably both.
Yeah, it could be both. It's always both. But if that was the case, it is kind of nice to think about that Allan was being put on edge a little bit about being caught.
Yeah, that's the least he can do is be put on edge.
It's better than thinking about him going on with his life without a care, getting away with murder.
Like he got to for 40-some years.
Mm-hmm. Police commented that Allan's behavior with his garbage was highly suspicious, saying, quote, he wouldn't throw anything away.
Yeah, that's odd.
Super odd. Police were eventually able to collect Allan's DNA from a discarded Sonic drive-in bag that he discarded in a post office trash bin one day. The bin was near where he lived at the time, and he had finally let his guard down enough to be caught. On February 23rd, 2021, a DNA match was confirmed between the blood on Bobbie Jo's gloves and the saliva from a napkin inside the fast food bag. Allan, at 70, was stopped while driving and arrested the next day by Detective Wendy Kipple, who had meticulously searched for his past records. Further DNA tests would follow and confirm that it was Allan's blood that was found on Bobbie Jo's clothes. For Bobbie Jo and Annette's families, the arrest was almost surreal.
It would be. You would have given up hope that they would ever be caught.
Right. Annette Schnee's mom, Eileen Franklin, said in an interview, quote, I thought there would be no closure. She was 88 years old at the time.
Aw.
She said, quote, I thought maybe I'd be gone before I had closure to this case. So that really, I'm ready to go now when it's my time.
Aw.
Yeah.
It would haunt you as a mother.
It would. Jeff said to the media, quote, I pray that the arrest for Allan Phillips for the murder of my wife Bobbie Jo and Annette Schnee will finally, after all these decades, bring closure and peace to this hideous nightmare for myself, along with all the lives that he horribly affected by his actions. I cannot thank enough all who never gave up the search for truth. They are, without a doubt, extremely dedicated and extraordinary individuals. Phillips is finally in the hand of the judicial system. May justice be served.
Amen.
Mm-hmm. And then Bobbie Jo's daughter, Jackie, made a statement that I thought was so heartbreaking. She said, quote, I have lived with a monster in my mind since I was 11 years old, and now I can rest knowing justice will be served. Can you imagine the trauma for a child to have her mother ripped from her.
No. A regular death, for lack of a better word, would be hard enough, let alone such a violent way to have your mother taken from you.
And then to have no answers. It would just be compounded.
It would. And to have police looking at your dad for so long. There's a whole lot of trauma going on there.
Mm-hmm. For the investigators, the elation was also mixed with some surreal feelings. The investigator hired by Annette's family, the one who had worked on the case for over 32 years, he said, quote, "I've been trying to define my emotions, and it's been really hard to do. I never thought I'd see this day, frankly."
And you know what? Not all heroes wear capes, and he totally was one.
It's amazing, the work that went into solving this crime.
Yes. Especially someone that he wasn't even connected to, that he just chose to fight for these women.
Yeah, he wasn't connected with the original investigation. It was almost 7 years later when he picked up the investigation and just ran with it.
That says a lot about his character and the type of person that he is.
Mm-hmm. Especially at the time when he was trying to recover himself from post-traumatic stress from being on the homicide department in Denver.
Right.
Allan was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of first-degree assault, and 2 counts of kidnapping. He claimed innocent of all of them. As the prosecution began to make a case against Allan that would put him behind bars for the rest of his life, someone else recognized Allan from his face that was now all over the newspapers. Someone else that had run into Allan the night of January 6, 1982.
What?
Yes. On the night of January 6, 1982, a motorist had become stuck in the ditch in the freezing temperatures on Guanella Pass, just under an hour northeast from where Bobbie Jo and Annette had been left to die in the snow, because their shots weren't fatal ones. So they actually died in the freezing temperatures.
They had to lay there in the cold, bleeding out. Over minus 30 temperature. Very cold.
Yeah.
Ugh.
On the pass, it was snowing heavily, and it didn't sound like it was a road that you would typically be driving on in the winter, let alone during a snowstorm. It wasn't well traveled, and there was very little chance of someone passing by to help. Walking back down the pass wasn't an option in the freezing temperatures because exposure could kill just as easily as a dirtbag can. In desperation to be saved, the driver flashed an SOS at a passing airplane up into the sky as a last-ditch effort to get some help. This SOS flashed into the sky twice, and amazingly, Jefferson County Sheriff Harold E. Bray was on the plane and recognized the signal.
No way.
Yeah. He quickly alerted the plane's captain, who called the SOS into local authorities on the ground.
That's amazing.
It does. It sounds like a miracle. Until you find out that it was actually Allan who was stuck out in the cold, and it was his life in danger that night.
No way.
Yes.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. He could have died up there had nobody rescued him. But Dave Montoya was the fire chief at the time, and one of the ones that risked his life to rescue Allan. It took over 4 hours for the rescue crew to get to Allan, all the way up the side of the mountain in the poor weather conditions. The crew figured that they were going to be rescuing some tourists because anyone local would have known better than to head up the pass during a winter storm. Dave said that when he arrived, that Allan's truck had its rear end stuck in the snowdrift half off the road and was perched precariously with its headlights pointing straight up into the air.
And sorry, was this before he murdered the 2 women or after?
It's after.
It's after.
Mm-hmm.
So the authorities are face to face with a man who just killed and sexually assaulted, raped 2 women.
Mm-hmm. But they have no idea.
Well, that would haunt you, wouldn't it?
Yes. Allan was overly grateful to see the fire chief, who he knew from working in the mines. When asked what the heck he was doing on the mountain road in a storm, Allan told Dave that he had gotten drunk and didn't want to drive his truck on the highway in case he would get pulled over. So he'd went over the pass because the police were not up there.
And nobody thought this was suspicious that he was in this vicinity.
Well, right now, they haven't found either of the women.
Right, but afterwards, they didn't connect the dots.
No, they had bought his story about trying to avoid a DUI.
Oh, so they probably just put it totally out of their minds.
Yeah, it didn't even enter their minds.
Often we know that a dirtbag will lie about a lesser crime to make it seem like they're being very honest and forthright.
Right.
So they would think, okay, he's admitting that he was driving drunk, so he's an honest guy and we don't have to worry about him.
And he's a local.
Yes.
They're not suspecting anything of him. They know him.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Allan's supposed miraculous rescue made headlines in the local papers on January 7th and 8th of 1982, appearing right beside the articles about Bobbie Jo's body being found.
Oh, that's salt in the wound. That leaves a really bad taste in your mouth.
Yeah, isn't that awful?
It is. He did not extend any mercy to them, but then he needed to be rescued?
Yeah.
Gross.
In his picture in the newspapers, which he is clearly not too happy to have had taken, he has a fresh gash above his right eye that's blackened, and he is bruised along the left side of his face as well.
From Bobbie Jo.
Mm-hmm.
And they really didn't connect the dots.
No, they figured that it happened when he went off the road for his accident.
And
yeah. Dave Montoya remembered the rescue almost 40 years later and brought up the connection to the police to be used as evidence against Allan.
oh, you would feel sick about it.
Yeah, he told reporters that, quote, "If I would have known what I've known, then I probably would have left him."
Yeah. Freezing to death out there would have been too good of a death even for him after what he had just done.
On August 31st, 2022, Allan's double murder trial began in Fairplay, Colorado. Both Bobbie Jo and Annette's families attended to make sure that Allan and the jury knew that no one had forgotten about what Allan had done that wicked night of January 6th, 40 years before. Throughout the trial, Allan remained stoic and emotionless and never once admitted his guilt. Instead, his defense team tried to cast doubt on the DNA evidence and tried to again throw Jeff under the bus for both murders.
Someone just needed to walk up there and throat punch him.
Yeah. Well, their argument was that the police had it right all along to suspect Jeff. It was really him.
When they have DNA evidence.
Yeah.
His actual blood right by the body.
Both of them.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. On September 15th, after almost 5 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all 8 charges.
Good.
The following November, he was sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole.
Also good.
Afterwards, the 71-year-old dirtbag said he would appeal the conviction because the DNA had been contaminated and mishandled. He was sent to Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility in Colorado, and on February 27th, 2023, the dirtbag Allan took his own life.
See ya. Sorry, but...
Well, some feel that he just escaped justice again because he never served his time.
Nope.
And that is the case of the secretive but brazen dirtbag, Allan Lee Phillips, the monster that hid in plain sight for over 40 years after taking the lives of 2 beautiful women whose lives were eternally thread together because of a seeming coincidence.
Oh, that was such an interesting case and just so sad for those involved. And I do 100% believe he had other victims, especially because he had started with one rape victim, escalated to murder. I don't see how he would have just stopped.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that he would have just stopped.
No, he was on this pattern of escalation.
Mm-hmm.
And to do 2 in one night, that's even an escalation. So was there a murder before those 2?
Oh, there could have been, because there was 10 years between his conviction and the 6 months he served and those 2 murders.
Right. Did he just mess up and did it too close to home for those 2 and then learned his lesson to do it other places?
Right. And we do know that the longer they go uncaught, the more confidence they gain to murder again. It is a scary thought.
It really is. But I'm glad that he is off the streets and not going to be able to hurt anybody else.
It's so true. And we'll be back again next week when Christy will tell you about another dirtbag safely locked behind bars as well.
Yeah, you're going to want to join us for this one. So until then,
see ya.
Bye.
Test again, Christy, and again, and again, and again, and test again, and again.
I detect a little bit of sassiness in what you're saying to me right now, and I'm not appreciating it.
What? I thought you like sass.
I'm just kidding.
You're a sassy type of girl, no? Don't even know where to go with that. My brain is not working.
But you just had a whole month off.
I know. How am I not ready to go?
Right?
Maybe that's why my brain isn't working, because we've had a whole month off.
It's gone into sleep mode.
Yeah, it's not back in work mode yet. 20-year-old.
20-year-old?
The snowbank was near the hoser.
Yeah, hoser.
Yeah, hoser.
Yeah,
I always
hoser.
want to say hoser.
Oh,
Okay.
that's because you're Canadian.
I know. Okay, what is it actually,
If a
though?
Canadian calls you hoser, it's not a great thing, just
No.
so you know.
But it's not hoser, it's
Hauser?
Hauser Pass. Not a lot is known publicly.
Publicy? And look at you showing off saying burglary
I
so
know.
well.
That didn't even faze me. I didn't even think about it.
I know. Use chocolate then while you do that.
You do that.
Snack pantry.
It's amazing. Stop.
Sorry, I was greedy and put 2 pieces in my mouth. Should I eat more chocolate?
No, don't.
Just kidding.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.